Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast aimed at intermediate to advanced level English learners. Why do language learners have an accent when they speak? How can we improve our accents? And should we really care about having an accent? Is it a bad thing? Well, let's talk about this on today's episode of Thinking in English. But first, why not follow the Thinking in English Instagram page, Thinking in English podcast, or the link is in the description. It's full of great vocabulary content. And definitely take a look at my blog, thinkinginenglish.blog, for all transcripts and some extra special bonus content. Here is today's vocabulary list. As always, the written list is available in the description of the podcast and also on my blog, thinkinginenglish.blog. Distinct. Distinct. Clearly separate and different from something else. For example, the dogs are two distinct breeds. Identity. Identity. Who a person is, or the qualities of a person that makes them different from others. As in prison, people often suffer from a loss of identity. To get rid. To get rid. To throw away or remove something unwanted. For example, horses get rid of flies by moving their tails. To perceive. To perceive. This verb means to come to an opinion about something or have a belief about something. For example, how do French people perceive the British? Phonetic. Phonetic. A spelling system can be described as phonetic if you can understand how words are pronounced simply by looking at their spelling. For example, Japanese has two different phonetic alphabets. Syllable. Syllable. A single unit of speech, either a whole word or one of the parts into which a word can be separated, usually containing a verb. For instance, the word button has two syllables. Comprehensibility. Comprehensibility. The quality of being easy or possible to understand. As in, I like the simplicity and comprehensibility of his writing style. Tongue twister. Tongue twister. A tongue twister is a sentence or phrase that is intended to be difficult to say, especially if it is repeated quickly and often. For example, she sells seashells on the seashore is a well-known tongue twister. A few weeks ago, I was playing a board game with a group of friends one evening. The group was very international. People from Germany, France, the USA, Taiwan, Japan, and the UK were all involved. After a while, a conversation, or maybe a debate would be a better word, began over the importance of learning accents. My friend from France was very insistent that to be fluent in a language, you need to also master the accent. Speak as if you are a native speaker. On the flip side, most of my other friends, and I, believe that accents are not that important. They're important, but they're not the most important thing. As a teacher, I tend to tell students to focus on being understood rather than copying the pronunciation of a native speaker. The simple reason is that there are hundreds, if not thousands of distinct English accents around the world? Is it really worth just focusing on one? However, this discussion did make me start to think about accents. Why do we have accents? Does our accent matter? Is it an important thing to focus on for students? How can we improve accents? So, on this episode of Thinking in English, I'm going to try to explore these questions and hopefully give you all some useful information. Importantly, this is not going to be the kind of article you usually find on the internet, promising to give you tips on how to improve your accent. Of course, I will give you some advice at the end of the episode, but as I already mentioned, I don't think accents are too important. As long as I can understand you, I think it's fine. I believe that having an accent is actually an interesting feature that can help you keep some of your identity while speaking in a foreign language. So instead, I'm mainly going to focus more on what an accent is, why we have them, and whether they are important or not. So let's start with that most basic question. What is an accent? In a nutshell, your accent is the way you sound when you speak. It is a combination of the sounds that you make with the stress you use and the timing of your words. Accents are different from dialects. An accent is just the differences in sounds and pronunciation, while dialects also involve different grammar and words. This is important because a lot of English learners often confuse dialects and accents. In all languages, there are both native and foreign accents. There is not just one native accent, but there can be many. Native accents are the way that a group of people, maybe a cultural group, a region, a country, a city, or even a small village, speak their own native language. Often this is connected to location and social class. Over years and years, people who live close together speak often together, and they gradually grow to share a way of speaking and develop an accent that is different from other groups. That is why people from Texas, who mainly speak to people from Texas, and people from Liverpool, who mainly speak to people from Liverpool, sound as if they are speaking two different languages, even though they are both speaking native English. Foreign accents occur when someone speaks a language using rules and sounds borrowed from a different language. If the speaker doesn't know how to pronounce a sound or a word, or they can't pronounce a sound or a word, they may use an alternative way of speaking from their own native language. People obviously have difficulties with sounds that don't exist in their native language. To illustrate, a German speaker may struggle with words like wish and this, as the beginning sounds, the w and the, don't exist in German. Instead, they may resort to using a v sound or a z sound, as these do occur in German. By using these foreign sounds, the speaker's accent doesn't quite sound usual or natural to native speakers. So, why do we have accents when we speak foreign languages? Surely we should just learn the rules the native speakers use. Well, it's not actually that easy. There are physical reasons why you may not be able to get rid of your accent. Sometimes we can't say a sound, even if we wanted to. The English sound th is an example. Many learners cannot physically say th sound in English. After we are born, we have what is known as a universal language learning capability. We have the ability to learn and perceive every sound if we are exposed to it. For a person to be able to pronounce certain sounds, you need to be exposed to them when you are young. Moreover, if you're not exposed to them, you might not even be able to hear the sound when you're an adult. So this is why for many adults, learning an accent can be the most difficult part of learning a language. According to a recent Economist article, another reason you have an accent in a foreign language is because pronunciation, stress, and rhythm are rarely taught well by English teachers. Focus is on grammar, vocabulary, sentence structure, and comprehension, instead of pronunciation and accent. This leaves students with no choice but to guess, to the best of their ability, how to say a sound or a word correctly. I taught for a few years in Japan, which is a country famous for their struggles at pronouncing English. One reason for this is that English textbooks in Japan will often explain pronunciation using a phonetic Japanese alphabet, instead of teaching students how to say words correctly or naturally. Compared to English, Japanese has relatively few sounds and almost always combines vowels and consonants together, meaning that the Japanese English accent sounds really unique to English speakers, and the phonetic alphabet they use to teach English doesn't relate really well to English itself. Also, using equivalent sounds does not always work. The Economist in their article gave the example of the P sound in English and French. Textbooks might not explain the difference between these two sounds, but in practice they do sound quite different. English speakers tend to make a strong puff of air when they say the letter P, P, while in French they don't use that strong puff of air. It's more of a P. So small differences like this are often not taught, but they are key in the development of accents. It's why an English person might say Paris, while someone else from France probably would say something different. Next, how about stress? When we speak, we put stress, or don't put stress, on the sounds that we use. All languages do it. To use French as an example again, they stress all words on the final syllable. This even applies to foreign words and names, which means that if you want to perfect the French accent, you need to adjust the way you stress your syllables. The American city Houston is Houston in French. In English, we also often will use secondary stress as well. For example, in the English word possibility, the primary stress is on the B syllable, and the secondary stress is on the P sound. A French speaker who would naturally stress the final syllable would pronounce this word very differently to a native English speaker. There are many other reasons why accents exist, too many for me to explain in detail right now. Rules about what can and can't be used to start a sentence in a language, combined consonants. Think about the English word squirrel, which has an odd squ sound at the beginning and a difficult r sound at the end. Or timing is another reason why accents can be difficult. Does having an accent affect your ability to communicate? From my experience, I would say it depends on your specific case, what your native language is, and who is listening to you speak. However, most of the time, you certainly do not need to sound like a native speaker to integrate into a society or to work professionally in English. Accents are also an important part of your identity and tell a story about who you are and where you come from. Research actually suggests that accent is not always the major problem when it comes to being understood for language learners. For example, while pronunciation errors make Hindi and Urdu speakers sound more accented, it is grammatical errors that affect their comprehensibility. On the other hand, for Chinese speakers, accent tends to be much more important and significant, while for Romance language speakers like French or Italian, both grammar and pronunciation affect the ability to be understood. So instead of focusing on reducing accents, the focus of teachers like myself and students like yourselves should be to make you more understandable, not to sound like a native speaker. Perhaps this does require pronunciation help, but perhaps you need to focus maybe more on your sentence structure and grammar. Focus on what you need to improve on to make yourself understood. So, despite what I've just said, I'm going to end this episode with a few tips on how you could improve your accent. The obvious tip is to listen to native English speakers. If you want to sound like someone from New York, listen to New Yorkers speak. If you want to sound like someone from Australia, listen to Australians. Listen to music, download podcasts like this one, or watch movies. The choice is yours. To really improve your pronunciation, however, you should concentrate on the sounds more than usual. Don't just watch in a relaxed way. Don't just listen to music in a casual way. Focus on what you are listening to. Focus on the sounds. The next two tips are a little bit more technical. You might not find this useful, but it certainly helped me with my pronunciation. First, try learning the International Phonetic Alphabet. If you have looked up a word in a dictionary and seen those strange looking characters below the word, that is actually a guide on how to pronounce the words. The International Phonetic Alphabet includes a symbol or character for almost all known spoken sounds in every language. If you know how to read those phonetic sounds, you will find it a lot easier than guessing how to pronounce English words. Second, you should think about your mouth more. You heard me right? Think about your mouth. So let me give you an example. Repeat after me. E, E, ah. So I want you to repeat after me, okay? E, E, ah. Do you notice what is happening in your mouth? The sounds are moving backwards. The E sound kind of starts towards the middle front of your mouth. Air starts moving back, and ah is right at the back in your throat. The sounds moving backwards and understanding where sounds are made, the shape your mouth should be, and the position of your tongue could really help to better your accent. Next, you could always listen to yourself and also watch yourself. Set up a phone or everyone carries a recorder with themselves now. Everyone has a smartphone where you can record yourself. Personally, I don't like doing this because I don't like the sound of my own voice. It's a bit strange for someone who makes a podcast, but I don't like listening to myself. But it is really useful, as you can hear the differences between what you think you are saying and what you are really saying. And then you can correct those differences. And finally, try some tongue twisters. I love tongue twisters, and I actually recorded an episode earlier this year introducing a few if you are interested. I'll link it in the description below and on my blog, but just for the end of this podcast, let me give you an example of a tongue twister. She sells seashells by the seashore. That's one of the most famous English tongue twisters. So here is today's final thought. On today's episode of Thinking in English, I have tried to explain English accents. I have talked about what an accent is and why you have one. Then I discussed if an accent is actually a bad thing to have, before ending on a few tips to help you improve. Overall, I don't think that having an accent is necessarily a bad thing. I don't think it's something necessary to focus too much time on. If it is affecting your ability to be understood, then of course try to improve. But the key is being understood, not sounding like a native speaker. So make sure all of your practice and all of your study is focused on being understood. How is your English accent? Do you want to sound like a native speaker, or would you like to keep your native accent? Do you think it is important or not? Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, please leave a review or rating, recommend it to your friends, or let me know on Instagram. My Instagram is Thinking in English Podcast. The link should be in the description. And make sure you check out the Thinking in English blog. I love hearing from listeners, and I really appreciate all of the messages I have received over the past few months. Feel free to send me a message or give me some advice or recommend a topic. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.